blending roles as a licensed massage therapist, educator, and author, champions holistic wellness backed by his mental health certifications. From hands-on therapy to teaching and speaking on national stages, he promotes a seamless connection between body and mind through his lifestyle architecture. His work aimed at creating a purposeful, happy lives is encapsulated in his teaching and his book, advocating for a healthier personal and professional world by addressing the issues and the tissues, the pain and the brain, and the hurt and the heart. And with a warm welcome, I'd like to shoot.
So I work with human beings being human. And I've had a real lengthy career that actually started as a second-generation holistic practitioner. My father started my training when I was about 13 years old. And I've been working with people that are dealing with things like musculoskeletal disorders. Can anybody give me an idea what one of those are? Yeah, you got it. Muscles in the skeleton. So anything involving that, okay? So we have things like work-related stress injuries. We have people that have to go in and get their shoulders fixed, or they have to get their knees replaced because they're standing on ground that's too hard for too long. And so I really have gotten to see a scope from head to toe of what can happen in the workplace if we do not create the most conducive environments for people to not get hurt in. And my story kind of, again, as I said, starts real young, but from that point, after 30 years of working with the issues in the tissues, I also started to branch out about 10, 15 years ago when I worked with therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy, which teaches us what we're thinking about when we do the things that we do and how we can correct that. In addition, I've also worked with neurolinguistics programming, which is all about how we use language to create our behaviors and what we can do to stay away from that. As a matter of fact, did you know that asking somebody why they did something is the worst thing that you can do? Like imagine you got on your favorite shoes and you're ready for the day and you walk into the office and somebody says, "Why'd you wear those?" You're gonna have to think to yourself, what in the hell do they mean? Why didn't I wear these shoes? They're my favorite shoes. So in neurolinguistics, we learn things like instead of why, we say, what were you looking to accomplish? So we can use language completely differently to get the outcomes that we're looking for. And most recently, I picked up my certification in neuropsychotherapy, which is all about the neuroscience of the brain and what happens when we have trauma and mental illness and traumatic brain injuries. Which, how many people were at Naomi's talk today? Anybody? Yeah. It was awesome, and it really is so cool. It was almost like everybody was picked at the right time for these things as well too. Because I'm going to be talking about a lot of the interventions we can do because we recognize pretty readily that this stuff is everywhere. One of the stats that she mentioned is that 1 in 5 people have a mental illness. So without having to look around or point any fingers, that's people here in this room. And we've got to really stay away from the stigma of what mental illness is and what traumatic brain injury is. As a matter of fact, did you know that if you had too much stress, who's heard of cortisol? Everybody's heard of cortisol, right? Well, that's the stress hormone. Cortisol will actually eat away at a part of your brain called the hippocampus, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And so I got all these certificates and I got all this really great experience and knowledge in the human condition and the cultures that we are in. And if you look at it, culture is not only kind of what we're dealing with, but it's also like bacteria in a petri dish, right? You ever link those two together? That's what a culture is. And so that's what we are. We're kind of a human experiment that's ongoing and forever. And my own personal life story is certainly one of a human experience. I first of all grew up with a lot of what were called aces. And that's not like in playing cards. That's the good kind of aces. Who's heard of ACEs? Adverse childhood experiences. Yeah? So the CDC did a study a little while back, and what they did was they put some numbers and statistics and some real science into the idea that if you had a messed up childhood, you're going to have a messed up adulthood. You're going to be prone to things like early morbidity, addiction, abuse. You're going to have that in your life because that's what you saw growing up. And so mine is that I actually got the bingo card of all aces. The CDC recognizes 10, and by the time I was about 8 or 9 years old, I got to experience all 10 of them. So I've seen what trauma and abuse and addiction are like from a firsthand. I've seen those traumatic brain injuries and how they are living in the world today. And then from that, because I got started in this holistic health field so early, I was able to be one of those people that are like a success story, that's not what happened to me. But I did get to see a lot of it. Like, for example, my mother was married 5 times. Who was that woman who got married a whole lot, like the famous one? Liz Taylor. I couldn't remember her name. So my mom was obviously in some sort of competition with her. And the 4th stepfather who brought us to Alaska, I thought this was going to be the guy. This was going to be my stepdad, because he was really cool. He was really nice. And then he went on tour. He was in the military, and he went to Reykjavik, Iceland. And he had an airplane door hit him on the head. When he came back, he was a completely different person. He was mean, he was aggressive, he had cognitive functioning issues, he was very abusive to everybody in the family. That's why mom got married a 5th time. But I didn't understand it. I said, is this what happens when people go to Iceland? I always thought those people were supposed to be nice. But it was all because, and I didn't know, of course, at the time, that he had a traumatic brain injury. I have another family member who was in the military, and he was in a helicopter accident in 1977. Just this past month, he's finally getting the support that he needs from the VA. That's 46 years, if I'm doing my math right, of going through a lifetime of having a lot of discipline problems, having problems with the law, problems with authority, problems with relationships. It was kind of like he was running this ring over and over and over again and didn't know how to get off. A very intelligent person, as a matter of fact, I'd probably put him genius level, but a life full of suffering simply because nobody checked on that early head trauma. And now we know, not only through all the tests that the VA have done, but he's also had practices. Anybody has ever heard of craniosacral therapy? So that's something that's probably changed his life, and that's a bodywork modality that focuses on the spinal cord and the cranium, and so it's kind of like a massage from the inside, and it's one of the only bodywork modalities that focuses specifically on things like brain trauma and the spinal cord. And so he's functioning, and he's doing much better now that he's getting the right kind of support, but this is just kind of a sign of the underlying symptoms that we have in our culture of not being able to know what to do with these kind of traumatic brain injuries and mental health, but furthermore, we don't even really want to recognize it because of the stigma. And so that's not where my story stops. I then have a really close person to me who she got lots of people got post-traumatic stress injury. You guys have heard of that one, right? Well, of course, both of those 2 men that I talked about did, but she had postpartum depression. She was diagnosed twice, and this was here in Anchorage. And the only thing that they had for her is they said, well, here's some drugs for you, and we'll see you in 6 months because you're on the list. 6 months for somebody who's suffering on a daily basis, not being able to control their aggression, not being able to really be the best mother that they can be. 6 months. I said, that's crazy. There's no way that can be. So let me help you out. Let me go ahead and I'll call around and we'll see what happens. The caseload for our psychotherapist here in Anchorage is 400 to 1. That's the ratio that we're working with. So there's simply not enough practitioners at that level to go around to help everybody that needs it. So we need to look at things differently. We need to do something else. She finally got the support that she needed after attempting to end her life 3 times. On that 3rd time, she was taken to API, and she finally got the real therapy and help that she needed. But that's the truth of it. People don't get the real help that they need until they try to hurt themselves. That's a culture that's doing something wrong. And so then, that's not where my story ends, of this human being experience of my own. Because this is really why I'm kind of, some people call me an expert in this health and wellness, and it's not because of those other things, but it's because of the experiences I've had. I got into a relationship, and I was with the woman for 2 years, and at first I didn't really see any signs or problems, and it went really well at first. She had a son that was 1 year older than my daughter, and the kids were 3 and 4 at the time, and I thought, oh man, I finally hit it. We had the same custody arrangement, so for 7 days of the week we had a family of 4, and we would do things, we'd go hiking, you know, we'd go to Dave & Buster's, all the fun stuff. And then the other week it was just her and I. So it really was kind of like heaven in many ways. And then all of a sudden, after being together for 2 years, we had some, like, all of a sudden aggression that kind of came out of nowhere. She had some sort of a psychological break that I really didn't understand at all, but she kicked us out of our home extremely suddenly, and I didn't know why. So 1 year later, a friend called me, and I was driving down Northern Lights, and he said, "Did you know that she ended the life of her little boy, my little bonus son?"